Cook this and my 5-star Michelin is yours. Millionaire chef mocks dishwasher. What she does next leaves him shocked. Sebastian Kane thought he was humiliating a dishwasher when he screamed, "You are just a dishwasher and nothing more." In fact, if you can cook this, my restaurant is yours. The 5-star chef had no idea his dishwasher was the granddaughter of the woman whose recipes built his entire career. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let me take you back to where this story really began, 3 years earlier, when a woman named Gabrielle Thompson first walked into his kitchen carrying secrets that would change everything. The knife, moved like liquid silver, in Sebastian Kane's hands, each cut precise, deliberate, almost surgical in its perfection. At 34, he commanded Le Lumiere's kitchen with the authority of a general and the temperament of a tyrant. His platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect man bun, not a strand out of place despite the chaos swirling around him. The crisp white chef's jacket he wore bore no stains, no evidence of the battle being fought in this culinary war zone. Behind! Behind! The calls echoed through the kitchen as servers weaved between stations, their black uniforms creating moving shadows against the gleaming stainless steel surfaces. Sebastian's ice-blue eyes surveyed his domain from the pass, where perfectly plated dishes awaited his final inspection. Le Lumiere occupied the penthouse of the Meridian Tower, its open kitchen design allowing wealthy diners to witness what Sebastian called culinary theater. Through the expansive glass windows, the San Francisco Bay stretched out like a dark mirror, reflecting the city's glittering lights. "Chef, the Wellington for table 12, called out Marie, one of his sous chefs, her voice tight with the evening's pressure. Sebastian lifted the silver cloche with a flourish that spoke of years performing for an audience. The beef Wellington sat like a golden crown on bone china, the pastry flaked to perfection, the center a perfect medium-rare pink. But his trained eye caught something, a slight imperfection in the sauce drizzle. "Unacceptable," he declared, his voice carrying the refined accent he'd cultivated during his years training in French kitchens. "Look at this sauce work. Amateur. Start over." Marie's face flushed red, but she nodded, whisking the plate away. Around them, the kitchen continued its frantic dance. Friday nights at Le Lumiere meant serving 250 covers to San Francisco's elite. Tech moguls, politicians, celebrities who expected nothing less than perfection. Sebastian's phone buzzed against his hip. Without looking, he knew it was another interview request, another food magazine wanting to crown him the next big thing in American cuisine. At 34, he already held 2 Michelin stars and had been featured on the cover of Culinary Arts magazine 3 times. His cookbook, Elevation, Modern French Techniques for the American Palate, had topped the New York Times bestseller list for 18 weeks. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the soufflé. He moved to Station 3, where his pastry chef, Henri, was pulling the evening's final batch of Grand Marnier soufflés from the oven. These weren't just desserts. They were Sebastian's signature, the dish that had earned him his first Michelin star at Le Bernardin in New York 5 years ago. "Beautiful," Sebastian murmured, watching the golden peaks rise like small mountains from their ramekins. "Table 7 gets the center one. Mrs. Patterson specifically requested." The kitchen door swung open with unusual force, and Sebastian's business partner, Roland Pierce, strode in wearing an expensive charcoal suit and a worried expression. Roland was old San Francisco money, the kind of investor who wrote checks with the same casual indifference he showed ordering coffee. "Sebastian, we need to talk," Roland said, his voice cutting through the kitchen noise. "Not now," Sebastian replied without looking up from the soufflés. "We're in the middle of service. The Chronicle review comes out tomorrow. Early copy says we're losing our second star." Sebastian's hand froze midway to the pass. Around them, the kitchen continued its rhythm, but something had shifted. The sous chefs exchanged glances. Marie dropped her voice to a whisper when calling out orders. "That's impossible," Sebastian said, his voice controlled but deadly quiet. "Our standards haven't dropped. If anything, we've elevated." "The reviewer says the food lacks soul," Roland interrupted. Quote, "technically proficient but emotionally sterile. Millionaire serves beautiful food with all the warmth of a surgical procedure." Sebastian's jaw tightened. 11 years of culinary school, stages in Michelin-starred kitchens across France, 16-hour days perfecting his craft, and some food critic dared to question his soul? "Get out of my kitchen," he said to Roland, his voice barely above a whisper. As Roland retreated, Sebastian turned back to his soufflés, but the magic of the moment had shattered. He could feel his staff's eyes on him, could sense their uncertainty. In a kitchen, confidence was everything. Doubt was a poison that spread faster than fire. The evening wound on, each dish perfect, each plate spotless, each customer satisfied but somehow untouched. Sebastian watched through the pass as diners photographed their meals, posted them to social media, praised the presentation. But he didn't see the joy he remembered from his early days cooking in his mentor's small bistro in Lyon. There, people had closed their eyes when they tasted his food. They had smiled, really smiled, not just the polite appreciation of obligation. By midnight, the last customer had departed, and the kitchen began its nightly transformation from battlefield to sanctuary. The servers counted their tips in the break room while the cooks cleaned their stations with religious devotion. Sebastian remained at the pass, staring at a half-eaten soufflé that had been returned. The customer claimed to be too full to finish. In all his years of cooking, he couldn't remember the last time someone hadn't finished one of his soufflés. The clock on the wall read 3:47 a.m. when the first dish hit the industrial sink with a metallic clang. While San Francisco slept, while the last Uber drivers delivered their final passengers home, while the city's restaurants stood empty and dark, Gabrielle Thompson began her day. She moved through the back entrance of Le Lumiere with the quiet efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of invisibility. At 42, Gabrielle possessed the kind of beauty that came from strength rather than softness. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, skin the color of rich coffee, and hands that told stories of hard work and harder choices. Her natural hair was wrapped in a colorful head wrap that brought life to the sterile kitchen environment, and she wore a simple denim shirt over dark jeans, practical clothes for practical work. But it was her eyes that held the real story. Dark brown and intelligent, they missed nothing, absorbed everything, cataloged every detail of the kitchen's operations with the precision of someone who understood that knowledge was power, and power was survival. Gabrielle tied her apron around her waist and surveyed the wreckage from the night service. Mountains of dishes, pots, and utensils waited like sleeping giants. The industrial dishwashers hummed their familiar song, a rhythm she'd grown to find comforting over the past 3 years. She had started this job out of necessity. After her husband's death in a construction accident had left her with mortgage payments and her daughter's college tuition, pride had become a luxury she couldn't afford. The fact that she had graduated from culinary school 15 years ago, that she had once dreamed of running her own restaurant, that she could identify every spice in Sebastian's pantry by scent alone. None of that mattered when bills needed paying. But as she worked, Gabrielle's trained eye cataloged everything. She noticed that Sebastian's team had overcomplicated the mise en place for the salmon course. 3 separate sauces when one well-constructed emulsion would have been more elegant. She observed that the pastry station had wasted nearly 2 pounds of butter through imprecise measurements. She watched the flow of the kitchen during service through security monitors, noting bottlenecks and inefficiencies that cost precious seconds during the dinner rush. Most importantly, she had been observing Sebastian Kane. For 3 years, she had watched him work, studied his techniques, memorized his recipes. She had seen his brilliance, and she had seen his blindness. Sebastian cooked with his head, not his heart. Every dish was a mathematics problem to be solved rather than a story to be told. Gabrielle's grandmother, Josephine, had taught her that cooking was conversation. Every ingredient had a voice, every technique a purpose beyond mere execution. When Josephine made her famous cornbread, she would hum spirituals while stirring the batter, claiming the vibrations made it rise higher. When she prepared her Sunday fried chicken, she would tell stories about each piece: the drumstick for dancing, the breast for nourishment, the wing for dreams of flight. "Food is love made visible, baby girl," Josephine used to say, her hands dusted with flour, her kitchen filled with a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the oven temperature. "You cook with your whole self, your history, your hopes, your heartbreak. That's what makes people remember." Gabrielle had carried those lessons through culinary school, through her brief stint as a prep cook at a small Oakland restaurant, through the dreams she'd had to abandon when life demanded different choices. Now, washing Sebastian's plates, she could taste the absence of that love in every returned dish, could see it in the way customers ate mechanically rather than savored each bite. She had just finished loading the third rack of dinner plates when she heard footsteps on the kitchen stairs. Sebastian appeared, still in his chef's jacket but with his hair disheveled, his usual composure cracked around the edges. He moved to the walk-in cooler, emerging with ingredients for what Gabrielle recognized as his late-night ritual: a simple scrambled egg that he ate alone at the prep counter. She had watched him make this same dish dozens of times, always the same way: 3 farm eggs, a touch of cream, coarse salt, white pepper, finished with chives. Technically perfect, utterly soulless. Tonight, though, something was different. Sebastian's hands shook slightly as he cracked the eggs. His whisking was aggressive rather than controlled. When he turned to the stove, Gabrielle saw something she had never seen before in his ice-blue eyes: doubt. The eggs scrambled too quickly. Sebastian cursed under his breath, starting over with fresh ingredients. This time, he overcompensated, cooking them too slowly, letting them turn rubbery and unappetizing. From her position at the dish station, Gabrielle found herself wanting to speak, to offer the small adjustment that would save his eggs. Add a touch of cold butter at the end, she thought. Take them off the heat while they're still slightly wet. They'll finish cooking from residual heat. But she remained silent. In 3 years, Sebastian Kane had never spoken to her beyond basic instructions. To him, she was part of the equipment, no more worthy of conversation than the industrial refrigerators or the gas ranges. Sebastian stared at his failed eggs, then scraped them into the trash with more force than necessary. He stood there for a long moment, his shoulders sagging with fatigue and something deeper, a weariness that came from achieving everything you thought you wanted and discovering it wasn't enough. "Rough night, chef," Gabrielle found herself saying, her voice soft but clear in the quiet kitchen. Sebastian spun around, startled. For a moment, he seemed surprised to find another human being in his sanctuary. "I didn't realize anyone else was here," he said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "I'm always here," Gabrielle replied, turning back to her dishes. "Just not usually noticed." There was no bitterness in her words, just fact. But something in her tone made Sebastian pause, made him really look at her for perhaps the first time in 3 years. "You've been here since the beginning," he said, more statement than question. 3 years, 2 months, 16 days, Gabrielle confirmed, not looking up from the plates she was rinsing. "Started the week you opened." Sebastian found himself studying this woman he had overlooked for so long. There was something in her posture, in the way she handled the dishes, that spoke of professional training. Her cuts were efficient, her movements economical. She worked with the kind of muscle memory that came from years in commercial kitchens. "You've worked in restaurants before," he observed. Gabrielle's hands stilled for just a moment. "A long time ago." Before Sebastian could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent notification. The Chronicle review had gone live early. 3 stars instead of 4. The words that would haunt him were already trending on social media, technically proficient but emotionally sterile. As he read the review, Sebastian's face darkened. All his training, all his sacrifice, all his perfectionism, dismissed as soulless craft. He looked up to find Gabrielle watching him with those intelligent dark eyes, and for a moment, he felt exposed, as if she could see through his carefully constructed facade to the insecure boy who had chosen cooking because it was the only place he felt in control. "They don't understand," he said, more to himself than to her. "Don't understand what?" Gabrielle asked, her voice gentle. "Excellence. Precision. What it takes to maintain standards." Sebastian's voice grew stronger, more familiar in its conviction. Food critics sit in their comfortable chairs and judge without understanding the discipline required, the sacrifice. "Maybe," Gabrielle interrupted quietly, "they understand something else." Sebastian's eyes flashed. "Such as?" "That perfect technique without heart is like playing a song with all the right notes but no music." The words hung in the air between them, simple but devastating. Sebastian felt something crack inside his chest. Not quite anger, not quite recognition, but something uncomfortably close to truth. "What would you know about it?" he asked, his voice cold. "You wash dishes." Gabrielle nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. And I watch. And I listen. And I remember what my grandmother taught me about the difference between cooking food and feeding souls." She turned back to her work, dismissing him as gently but firmly as he had dismissed countless others. For Sebastian Kane, master of his culinary universe, the sensation was entirely new. And absolutely infuriating. 24 hours after the Chronicle review hit the internet, Le Lumiere's dining room buzzed with a different energy. The usual Saturday night crowd had been replaced by curiosity seekers and food bloggers, all eager to witness what they assumed would be Sebastian Kane's professional downfall. Reservations had actually increased. Nothing drew San Francisco's elite like the possibility of witnessing a spectacular failure. Sebastian stood at the pass, his chef's jacket immaculate as always, but something had shifted in his demeanor. His movements were sharper, more aggressive. The ice-blue eyes that usually observed with clinical detachment now burned with a desperate need to prove the critics wrong. "Fire 2 Wellingtons, 3 duck confit," he barked, his voice cutting through the kitchen's controlled chaos. The evening service had started flawlessly. Every plate that left the pass was a masterpiece of technique and presentation. The amuse-bouche, a delicate sphere of goat cheese foam that burst on the tongue, had drawn actual gasps from the dining room. The lobster bisque, enriched with cognac and finished with micro-herbs, was perhaps the best Sebastian had ever created. But perfection, he was learning, was a prison of its own making. At 8:43 p.m., disaster struck with the quiet violence of a whisper. Sebastian had just put the finishing touches on his signature soufflé service. 12 individual Grand Marnier soufflés that would serve as the evening's grand finale. These weren't just desserts. They were his declaration of war against every critic who dared question his artistry. Each one rose exactly 3 inches above its ramekin, the tops golden brown and perfectly domed, dusted with powdered sugar that caught the kitchen lights like snow. "Table 12 is ready for dessert service," called Marie from the expediting station. Sebastian personally carried the first soufflé to the pass, his chest swelling with pride. Mrs. Whitman, the food critic from Bay Area Dining, sat at table 12 with her dining companion, her notebook discreetly hidden beside her water glass. This soufflé would be her first impression of his dessert program, the moment that could salvage his reputation. But as Sebastian set the ramekin on the pass, the impossible happened. The soufflé collapsed. Not gradually, not with the slow deflation of an overcooked attempt, but instantly, catastrophically, with a soft hissing sound that seemed to echo through the entire kitchen. The golden dome crumpled inward like a deflated balloon, leaving nothing but a sad pool of eggy disappointment in its place. "No," Sebastian whispered, staring at the ruins of his masterpiece. Around him, the kitchen fell silent. Sous chefs stopped mid-chop. Line cooks froze over their sauté pans. Even the dishwater seemed to stop running. In the world of high-end cuisine, a collapsed soufflé wasn't just a failed dessert. It was a public execution of reputation. Sebastian's hands trembled as he reached for another soufflé from the service tray. This one held its form for 3 seconds before collapsing with the same devastating finality. Then the third. Then the fourth. "Chef!" Marie's voice was barely audible. Sebastian spun toward his pastry station, where Henri stood frozen, his face pale with horror. The remaining soufflés on the cooling rack were dropping one by one, like dominoes in slow motion. 12 perfect desserts becoming 12 perfect failures. "What did you do?" Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet, but it carried to every corner of the kitchen. "Nothing different, chef. Same recipe, same technique, same timing." "Obviously not." Sebastian exploded, his control finally snapping. "Look at this. Look at what you've done to my reputation." The dining room had begun to take notice. Servers stood awkwardly at the pass, unsure whether to deliver collapsed soufflés or retreat. Mrs. Whitman's companion had pulled out his phone, undoubtedly capturing the chaos for social media. Sebastian's vision tunneled, focusing on the destruction before him. 3 years of building Le Lumiere's reputation, decades of perfecting his craft, his entire identity as a chef, all of it crumbling like these cursed desserts. "Remake them," he ordered. "All of them. Now." "Chef, there's no time," Henri protested. "Soufflés take 45 minutes minimum. Then make something else. Anything. Just fix this." But Sebastian knew it was too late. The damage was done. Mrs. Whitman was already requesting her check. Other diners were whispering behind their hands, some pointing toward the kitchen. He could practically hear the social media posts being composed. Watched Sebastian Cain's soufflés collapse in real time. Maybe the critics were right about the emperor's new clothes. In his peripheral vision, Sebastian noticed movement. Gabrielle Thompson had emerged from the dish pit, drawn by the commotion. She stood near the prep station, her dark eyes taking in the scene with calm assessment. Something about her presence, her quiet observation of his public humiliation, ignited a rage Sebastian didn't know he possessed. "What are you looking at?" he snarled, turning his fury toward this safe target. Gabrielle met his gaze steadily. "I'm looking at a chef who's forgotten that soufflés are temperamental. They need to be handled with patience and respect, not anger." The kitchen went dead silent. In 3 years, no one had heard Gabrielle speak more than essential pleasantries. Certainly no one had ever heard her offer culinary advice to Sebastian Cain. "Excuse me." Sebastian's voice was dangerously low. Gabrielle stepped closer, her posture straight but non-threatening. "Your kitchen's been running hot all evening. The ovens are cycling unevenly because of the stress load. The soufflés couldn't maintain their structure because..." "Because what?" Sebastian interrupted. "Because some dishwasher thinks she understands haute cuisine better than a Michelin-starred chef?" Murmurs rippled through the kitchen staff. Marie shot warning glances at the other cooks, who suddenly found their prep work fascinating. But Gabrielle didn't back down. "Because soufflés aren't just technique. They're trust. You have to trust the process, trust the ingredients, trust that if you create the right environment, they'll rise. Force them, stress them, cook them with anger in your heart, and they'll fail every time." Sebastian felt something dangerous building in his chest, a combination of humiliation, fury, and something else he couldn't name. This woman, this nobody who spent her days elbow-deep in dirty dishwater, dared to lecture him about cooking? About trust. "You want to talk about trust?" Sebastian's voice rose to a near shout. You want to stand there and pretend you understand what it takes to create something perfect? He grabbed one of the collapsed soufflés, holding it up like evidence in a trial. This is what happens when the foundation cracks. When everything you've built your life on turns out to be as fragile as egg whites and hot air. The words poured out of him now, 3 years of suppressed interactions, decades of looking down on those he considered beneath him. You think washing my dishes gives you the right to critique my cooking? You think watching from the shadows makes you qualified to judge a chef who's dedicated his entire life to this craft? Gabrielle's expression remained calm, but Sebastian saw something flicker in her dark eyes. Not fear, but disappointment. Somehow, that made him even angrier. You know what? Sebastian continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the kitchen, every server still lingering at the pass. Since you seem to think you understand cooking so well, why don't you prove it? He strode to the prep station and grabbed a clean ramekin, slamming it down on the steel counter. Make me a soufflé. Make me anything worthy of this kitchen. Cook something, anything, that deserves to be served in a restaurant with Michelin stars. The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Sebastian could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the eyes of his entire staff upon him. He was aware, dimly, that he had crossed a line, that his professional demeanor had completely shattered. But the words kept coming, driven by pain and pride and 3 years of dismissing this woman as invisible. Cook this, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouting, and my 5-star Michelin restaurant is yours. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ventilation fans seemed to hold their breath. Gabrielle looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached behind her back and untied her dishwashing apron. The sound of fabric rustling seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. I accept, she said simply. 2 words. Quiet, dignified, spoken without drama or fanfare. But they landed in the kitchen like a thunderbolt, changing everything in an instant. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. Around him, his staff exchanged shocked glances. Marie actually gasped. Henri dropped his whisk. What? Sebastian whispered. Gabrielle folded her apron neatly and set it on the prep counter. I said I accept your challenge, Chef Kane. When would you like to do this? The reality of what he had just done hit Sebastian like a physical blow. He had just offered his restaurant, his life's work, his identity, everything he was, to a dishwasher in a moment of rage. In front of witnesses. In front of his entire staff. There was no taking it back. Sebastian started, then stopped. His mouth felt dry. His hands were shaking. Gabrielle waited patiently, her dark eyes holding something Sebastian couldn't identify. Not triumph, not smugness, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like compassion. Tomorrow night, Sebastian heard himself say. After regular service. Just you, me, and whatever witnesses you want to bring. Gabrielle nodded once. Tomorrow night. She picked up her apron and walked back toward the dish pit, leaving Sebastian standing alone at the prep station, staring at the collapsed soufflé in his hands and wondering what he had just done to his life. Around him, his kitchen slowly returned to motion, but everything had changed. The servers whispered excitedly as they finally cleared the remaining tables. His sous chefs worked with new intensity, as if they were suddenly unsure who they'd be working for come Monday morning. And Sebastian Kane, 2-time Michelin star winner, master of his culinary domain, stood frozen in the center of it all, realizing that in trying to prove his superiority, he might have just handed his entire world to a woman whose last name he didn't even know. The soufflé in his hands crumbled a little more, and Sebastian wondered if he was watching his career do the same. Sebastian Kane had not slept. He sat in his Pacific Heights penthouse, still wearing yesterday's chef's jacket, staring at the San Francisco Bay through his wall-to-wall windows. The morning fog rolled in like a gray blanket, obscuring Alcatraz Island and the Golden Gate Bridge beyond. Somewhere in that haze, his career was dissolving just as completely. His phone had been buzzing incessantly since 3 a.m. Text messages, voicemails, emails, all asking the same question. Is it true you bet your restaurant on a dishwasher? The video had gone viral overnight. Someone, probably one of the servers, had captured the entire exchange on their phone. The footage was shaky, the audio muffled by kitchen noise, but Sebastian's words came through crystal clear. Cook this and my 5-star Michelin restaurant is yours. Sebastian's reflection stared back at him from the darkened phone screen. Hollow-eyed, stubble-covered, looking every bit the man who had just destroyed his own life in a moment of spectacular stupidity. "What were you thinking?" he whispered to himself. The truth was, he hadn't been thinking at all. He had been feeling rage, humiliation, desperation, emotions he had spent 34 years learning to suppress in favor of clinical precision. One moment of weakness, one crack in his carefully constructed armor, and everything he had built came tumbling down like those cursed soufflés. His doorbell chimed with the pretentious 8-note melody he had programmed to announce visitors. Sebastian considered ignoring it, but the chiming persisted with the determined rhythm of someone who knew he was home. Roland Pierce stood in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His usually perfect silver hair was mussed, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he had slept in it. Behind him stood Catherine Wells, La Lumiere's head of public relations, clutching a tablet and wearing the expression of someone delivering terminal news. "We need to talk," Roland said without preamble. They sat in Sebastian's living room, a showcase of minimalist design that reflected his approach to cooking. Clean lines, expensive materials, utterly devoid of warmth. Catherine swiped through social media feeds on her tablet, each screen showing more carnage. 18 million views and counting, she reported, her voice clinical. Food Network wants an exclusive interview. TMZ is calling it the Great Chef Meltdown of 2023. And Gordon Ramsay posted a laughing emoji. Sebastian winced. When Gordon Ramsay was mocking you, you had officially hit rock bottom. "Here's what we're going to do," Roland said, leaning forward in his leather chair. "We call it a publicity stunt. Performance art. Guerrilla marketing for a new reality show. Americans love redemption stories. We'll spin this as your way of giving back, highlighting overlooked talent in professional kitchens." "It wasn't a stunt," Sebastian said quietly. "Of course it was," Roland insisted. "No one bets a multi-million-dollar restaurant on." "It wasn't a stunt." Sebastian's voice cracked like a whip. "I lost my temper. I said something stupid. And now I have to live with the consequences." Catherine and Roland exchanged glances. In their world of managed narratives and calculated risks, Sebastian's commitment to honoring a moment of weakness was incomprehensible. "Sebastian," Catherine said gently, "we can make this go away. A simple statement about miscommunication, maybe a charitable donation to a culinary scholarship fund. By next week, this will be forgotten." "And then what?" Sebastian stood up, pacing to the windows. "I go back to my kitchen, pretend nothing happened, keep cooking perfect food that no one remembers 20 minutes after they've eaten it?" The Chronicle review flashed through his mind again, technically proficient but emotionally sterile. "What if she wins?" he asked, not turning around. "She won't," Roland said firmly. "She's a dishwasher, Sebastian. Washing dishes is not the same as running a Michelin-starred restaurant." But even as Roland spoke the words, Sebastian remembered the way Gabrielle had moved through his kitchen, the professional assessment in her dark eyes, the certainty in her voice when she had diagnosed his soufflé problem. There had been something there, something he had dismissed for 3 years but could no longer ignore. Across the city in the Richmond district, Gabrielle Thompson sat at her kitchen table, staring at the same viral video that was destroying Sebastian's peace of mind. Her small house, a 1940s bungalow she had inherited from her grandmother, was the opposite of Sebastian's sterile penthouse. Every surface held memories: cast iron skillets seasoned by decades of use, wooden spoons worn smooth by countless hands, mason jars filled with spices whose origins told the story of 3 generations of cooking. The kitchen walls were covered with photographs. Her grandmother Josephine in her chef's whites at the Fairmont Hotel in 1962, the only black woman in a sea of white faces. Josephine accepting a culinary award from the San Francisco Restaurant Association in 1968. Josephine teaching a young Gabrielle to roll pie crust in this very kitchen. "What have I done, Grandmama?" Gabrielle whispered to the largest photograph. Her phone had been ringing all morning. Local news stations, food bloggers, her cousin in Oakland who had seen the video and was alternately laughing and demanding to know if Gabrielle had lost her mind. The honest answer was that she didn't know. For 3 years, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Clock in, wash dishes, observe, clock out. It was safe, predictable, and it paid the bills. Her daughter Monica was in her senior year at UC Davis, studying business with plans to open her own restaurant someday. All Gabrielle had to do was keep her head down for 1 more semester, and Monica would graduate debt-free. But then Sebastian Kane had stood there in his pristine chef's jacket, surrounded by the wreckage of his own arrogance, and challenged her to prove something she had been hiding for 15 years. Gabrielle opened the wooden recipe box that sat beside Josephine's photograph. Inside, written in her grandmother's careful script, were the secrets that had made Josephine Washington one of San Francisco's most innovative chefs before the world decided that black women belonged in domestic kitchens, not professional ones. Honey bourbon glazed duck with sweet potato puree and collard green chimichurri, the dish that had won Josephine the James Beard nomination she never received because the committee couldn't find her contact information. Buttermilk fried chicken with truffle mac and cheese, the recipe that had been adapted by 3 different white chefs who later built entire careers on variations of Josephine's innovation. Brown butter cornbread soufflé with sorghum ice cream, the dessert that had made food critics weep but had never appeared in any cookbook because Josephine had died before finding a publisher willing to take a chance on her work. Gabrielle had grown up hearing these stories, learning these recipes, understanding that her grandmother's genius had been systematically erased from culinary history. She had gone to culinary school planning to reclaim that legacy, to honor Josephine's memory by proving that excellence had no color. But life had other plans. Marriage, motherhood, widowhood, and the crushing weight of financial reality had pushed those dreams into the background. The recipes had become private treasures, prepared only for family dinners and church potlucks. Until yesterday. Gabrielle picked up her phone and scrolled through the comments on the viral video. Most were predictable: jokes about Dishwasher versus Master Chef, memes about David and Goliath, speculation about whether this was all staged for publicity. Monica had texted that morning, "Mom, please tell me you're not actually going through with this insanity." Gabrielle had stared at that message for 20 minutes without responding. How could she explain that this wasn't insanity? It was destiny finally demanding to be acknowledged. Her doorbell rang, and Gabrielle found her neighbor Mrs. Chen standing on the porch with a concerned expression and a container of homemade dumplings. "I saw the news," Mrs. Chen said without preamble. "Are you really going to cook against that fancy chef?" Gabrielle invited her in, and they sat at the kitchen table while Mrs. Chen insisted on making tea. "He thinks he knows what cooking is," Gabrielle said finally. "Perfect technique, expensive ingredients, precise execution. But he's missing the most important part." "Which is?" Gabrielle touched Josephine's photograph. "Soul. Story. The reason why we cook in the first place." Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. My mother used to say that anyone can follow a recipe, but only a true cook can make food that feeds the heart. Exactly. Gabrielle felt something settling in her chest, a certainty she hadn't experienced in years. Sebastian Kane cooks to impress. My grandmother taught me to cook to nourish. That's the difference he's about to learn. Mrs. Chen smiled. What will you make? Gabrielle looked at the recipe box, then at her grandmother's photograph, then at her own reflection in the kitchen window. For the first time in 15 years, she allowed herself to imagine standing in a professional kitchen not as hired help, but as a chef. Something that tells the truth, she said. Something that honors where I come from and proves where I can go. As Mrs. Chen left with promises to attend the cooking challenge, Gabrielle pulled out her phone and typed a response to Monica. Sometimes you have to risk everything to become who you're meant to be. This is my time, baby girl. She set the phone aside and opened Josephine's recipe box. Tomorrow night, she would either vindicate 3 generations of silenced voices or fail spectacularly in front of the entire city. Either way, she would fail or succeed as herself, not as the invisible woman washing someone else's dishes, but as Josephine Washington's granddaughter, carrying forward a legacy that had been waiting 15 years to be revealed. The morning fog was lifting from the Richmond district, and for the first time in years, Gabrielle Thompson could see clearly. The kitchen felt different when Sebastian arrived at 6 a.m., 2 hours before his usual time. The familiar space that had been his sanctuary now felt like a courtroom where he would face judgment in less than 14 hours. Every gleaming surface seemed to mock him. Every perfect knife seemed to whisper about the precision he might lose forever. He wasn't alone. Gabrielle stood at the central prep station, wearing a simple black chef's coat that Sebastian had never seen before. Her natural hair was pulled back in a professional bun, secured with bobby pins that caught the morning light streaming through the kitchen skylights. She moved with quiet confidence, laying out her mise en place with the methodical precision of someone who had spent the weekend planning every detail. You're early, Sebastian said, his voice echoing strangely in the empty kitchen. So are you, Gabrielle replied without looking up from the notebook she was consulting. Her handwriting was neat, precise, the kind of careful documentation that spoke of serious culinary training. Sebastian approached cautiously, as if she were a wild animal that might flee. For 3 years, they had existed in the same space but different worlds. Now, circumstances had forced them into an intimacy neither had chosen. What are you making? He asked. Gabrielle glanced up, her dark eyes unreadable. Does it matter? You've already decided I'm going to fail. The words stung because they carried truth. Sebastian had spent the weekend convincing himself that this entire situation was temporary embarrassment that would resolve itself once Gabrielle's amateur limitations were exposed. But looking at her now, the professional knife roll, the organized ingredient lists, the calm focus, doubt crept in like fog through his certainty. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, Sebastian said, the admission escaping before he could stop it. Gabrielle set down her pen and really looked at him. How did you mean for it to happen? The question hung between them, loaded with implications Sebastian wasn't ready to explore. How had he meant for anything to happen? His entire career had been built on control, on eliminating variables, on ensuring that every outcome matched his precise expectations. I don't know, he admitted. Before Gabrielle could respond, the kitchen's back door opened with a bang. Roland Pierce strode in, followed by Catherine Wells and a man Sebastian didn't recognize. Tall, thin, with the predatory smile of someone who made money from other people's misfortune. Sebastian! Roland's voice boomed with forced joviality. I'd like you to meet Harvey Goldman from Bravo Networks. He's very interested in documenting tonight's event. Harvey stepped forward, extending a manicured hand. Chef Kane. What an absolute pleasure. We're thinking this could be the pilot for a whole new reality format, Bet the Kitchen, or maybe All or Nothing Chef. The network is very excited about the possibilities. Sebastian felt something cold settle in his stomach. This isn't entertainment. Of course it is. Harvey laughed. 2 chefs, 1 impossible challenge, everything on the line. It's television gold. We've already set up preliminary camera positions, and we're bringing in a full crew for tonight. Gabrielle had gone very still at her prep station. Sebastian could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands had stopped moving altogether. No cameras, Sebastian said firmly. Harvey's smile faltered. I'm sorry. I said no cameras. This is between her and me. Not the network, not the viewers, not anyone else. Roland's face flushed red. Sebastian, be reasonable. This could save your reputation. Spin the whole thing as innovative programming. My reputation is my problem, Sebastian interrupted. Not a television opportunity. Harvey tried again. Chef Kane, I understand your hesitation, but consider the promotional value. Get out. Sebastian's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. All of you, get out of my kitchen. The silence that followed was deafening. Roland's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Catherine looked between her tablet and Sebastian as if he had just announced his intention to burn the restaurant down. Sebastian, Roland said carefully, you're making a mistake. This could be your way out. I said get out. After they left, trailing muttered threats about investors and contractual obligations, the kitchen felt enormous. Sebastian and Gabrielle stood on opposite sides of the prep station like boxers in neutral corners. Thank you, Gabrielle said quietly. Sebastian looked at her in surprise. For what? For not turning this into a circus. For keeping it about the cooking. Something shifted in Sebastian's chest, a small loosening of the knot of anxiety that had been tightening since Saturday night. You thought I would sell you out for television? I thought you would do whatever protected your interests, Gabrielle replied honestly. Most people do. Sebastian considered this. Most people probably would. They worked in parallel for the next hour, Sebastian preparing his own mise en place while Gabrielle continued her methodical organization. Neither spoke, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it carried the focused quiet of 2 professionals respecting each other's process. Sebastian found himself stealing glances at Gabrielle's station. Her knife work was flawless, julienne cuts so precise they looked machine-made, brunoise so uniform each cube could have been measured with calipers. Her movements were economical, confident, bearing the muscle memory of someone who had learned proper technique and never forgotten it. Where did you train? He asked suddenly. Gabrielle paused in her prep. California Culinary Academy. Graduated 15 years ago. Why didn't you ever mention that? You never asked. Gabrielle's voice held no accusation, just fact. In 3 years, you never once asked me anything about myself. The words hit Sebastian like a physical blow. He tried to remember a single conversation they'd had beyond basic work instructions and came up empty. She had been invisible to him, not because she had chosen to be, but because he had chosen not to see her. What did you do after graduation? He asked, trying to fill in 15 years of blank space. Worked prep at a small place in Oakland. Then I got married, had my daughter, tried to balance family and kitchen work. Gabrielle's knife never stopped moving as she spoke. After my husband died, I needed steady hours and reliable pay. Dishwashing at a high-end restaurant paid better than line cooking at most places. You've been watching my kitchen for 3 years. I've been learning your kitchen for 3 years, Gabrielle corrected. Every technique, every recipe, every shortcut and mistake. You're a brilliant chef, Sebastian. But you cook like you're afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of being human. Afraid of making something imperfect. Afraid of letting people see that you feel things. Sebastian's hands stilled over his ingredients. And you? What are you afraid of? Gabrielle was quiet for so long that Sebastian thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm afraid of proving them right. Everyone who said I didn't belong in professional kitchens. Everyone who looked at me and saw help instead of a chef. I'm afraid that maybe I've been washing dishes for so long, I've forgotten how to cook with confidence. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Sebastian felt an unexpected urge to comfort her, to tell her that confidence could be rebuilt, that talent didn't disappear just because it had been hidden. Instead, he said, "Show me what you're making." Gabrielle hesitated, then slid her notebook across the prep station. Sebastian read her neat handwriting, his eyebrows rising with each line. Grandmother's duck confit with 5-spice and sorghum glazed sweet potato and bourbon puree collard green and peanut chimichurri brown butter cornbread soufflé with vanilla bean ice cream. This is... Sebastian paused, recognizing the sophistication of the flavor combinations, the technical challenges involved in each component. This is restaurant-quality menu planning. It's my grandmother's recipes, updated for modern presentation but true to her original vision. Sebastian looked up from the notebook. Your grandmother was a chef? Josephine Washington. She worked at the Fairmont in the 60s, then opened her own catering company. Never got the recognition she deserved, but she trained half the black cooks in San Francisco back then. A memory stirred in Sebastian's mind, something his first mentor in Lyon had mentioned about American culinary history, about innovations that had been attributed to the wrong people. But before he could pursue the thought, Gabrielle spoke again. What are you making? Sebastian had been working for muscle memory, laying out ingredients for his signature dishes without conscious thought. Now, looking at his station, he realized he had defaulted to the same menu that had earned him his Michelin stars. Technically perfect, emotionally vacant. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe that's your problem, Gabrielle said gently. You're so focused on cooking what you think you should make, you've forgotten how to cook what you want to make. And what do I want to make? Gabrielle smiled, the first real smile Sebastian had ever seen from her. That's what you need to figure out. You have 8 hours. As if summoned by her words, the kitchen's main door opened and the day shift began arriving. Marie entered first, followed by Henri and the other cooks, all of them stopping short when they saw Sebastian and Gabrielle working side by side. Morning, chef, Marie said carefully, uncertainty clear in her voice. Morning, Sebastian replied. Normal service today. Tonight's event happens after close. The kitchen slowly came to life around them, but Sebastian and Gabrielle remained in their bubble of forced proximity, two chefs preparing for a battle that had somehow become something else entirely, a conversation about fear, recognition, and the courage required to cook from the heart. Sebastian looked at his ingredient list again, then crumpled it up and started over. For the first time in years, he was going to cook something he actually wanted to eat. Tell us in the comments, what dish represents your heritage and family history? We'd love to hear about the recipes that connect you to your roots. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. This story is just getting started. The lunch service had been unusually quiet, a mixture of curiosity seekers and regular diners who seemed more interested in studying Sebastian and Gabrielle than actually eating their food. By 3 p.m., the last customer had departed, leaving the kitchen in that strange afternoon limbo between services. Sebastian found himself drawn to Gabrielle's prep station, where she was carefully breaking down a whole duck with the precision of a surgeon. Her knife moved in confident strokes, separating legs from thighs, removing the breast meat in perfect portions. It was the kind of butchery that took years to master. My mentor in Lion used to say that how a chef breaks down a duck tells you everything about their training, Sebastian said, watching her work. Your mentor was right. Gabrielle didn't look up from her cutting board. My grandmother taught me on chickens first, then guinea fowl, then duck. Said if you could respect the animal enough to use every part with skill, you earned the right to cook it. Sebastian leaned against the prep counter. Tell me about her. Your grandmother. Gabrielle's hands paused for just a moment. In 3 years of working together, this was the first time Sebastian had asked about her personal life. Josephine Washington was born in Alabama in 1925, Gabrielle began, her voice taking on the cadence of a story told many times. Came to San Francisco during World War II to work in the shipyards. But her real talent was in the kitchen. As Gabrielle worked, she painted a picture of a woman who had revolutionized Southern cooking techniques for West Coast palates. Josephine had been one of the first cooks to incorporate Asian flavors into traditional soul food, creating fusion dishes decades before the term existed. She started cooking for wealthy families in Pacific Heights, Gabrielle continued, now working on the duck's legs with practiced efficiency. Word spread about her Sunday dinners, tables that brought together different communities, different cultures, all connected through her food. Sebastian found himself genuinely curious. How did she end up at the Fairmont? Pure determination. Gabrielle smiled at the memory. She walked into the executive chef's office in 1962, carrying a basket of her cornbread and a pot of her famous gumbo. Told him she could teach his French cooks things they'd never learned in any European kitchen. And he hired her? Eventually. She spent 2 years working prep, proving herself, earning respect one dish at a time. By 1965, she was running the hotel's banquet kitchen, creating menus for some of the biggest events in the city. Gabrielle moved to her spice station, where she had laid out an array of seasonings that Sebastian recognized but had never seen combined in quite this way. Star anise, pink peppercorns, sumac, berbera, a global pantry that spoke of sophisticated palate development. She sounds remarkable, Sebastian said, meaning it. She was. But remarkable wasn't enough. Gabrielle's voice carried a note of old pain. In 1968, she created a menu for the James Beard Foundation dinner in San Francisco. 5 courses that told the story of American cuisine through the lens of immigrant and indigenous influences. Food critics called it revolutionary. What happened? The executive chef at the Fairmont took credit, presented the menu as his own creation, his innovation. When Josephine protested, she was fired for insubordination. Sebastian felt something cold settle in his stomach. That's theft. It was 1968, Gabrielle said simply. Black women didn't get to be innovative chefs in the eyes of the culinary establishment. They got to cook what other people took credit for. She walked to her knife roll and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with age. This is her original recipe book. Everything she created, documented in her own hand. Techniques that later showed up in cookbooks by white chefs who became famous for inventing them. Sebastian took the notebook with reverence, aware he was holding something precious. Josephine's handwriting was elegant, each recipe detailed with notes about flavor development, cooking times, seasonal variations. As he read, Sebastian's culinary education began to shift and rearrange itself. Duck confit with 5-spice and sorghum reduction. Dated 1967, 3 years before Sebastian's French mentor had claimed to discovered the technique of incorporating Asian spices into classical French preparations. Cornbread soufflé with bourbon custard. Dated 1965. Predating by decades the modern American dessert preparations that had made several celebrity chefs famous. Collard green chimichurri, dated 1969, the first recorded fusion of South American technique with Southern American ingredients that wouldn't appear in mainstream cookbooks until the 1990s. This is... Sebastian's voice trailed off as the implications hit him. These techniques, these flavor combinations, I learned variations of these in France. My mentors presented them as classical preparations, but they're not, are they? Innovation rarely comes from where culinary history says it does, Gabrielle said gently. My grandmother wasn't the only one. There were black chefs, Latino cooks, Asian immigrants, all creating, all innovating, all being written out of the story. Sebastian continued reading, feeling increasingly sick as he recognized technique after technique that he had been taught to attribute to famous European chefs. The 5-spice duck confit that had earned him his first Michelin star. It was a direct descendant of Josephine's 1967 creation. Why are you showing me this? He asked. Gabrielle took the notebook back, closing it carefully. Because you need to understand what you're really competing against tonight. This isn't just about my cooking versus yours. It's about recognizing voices that have been silenced, techniques that have been stolen, innovations that have been erased. She moved to her mise en place, where duck legs were curing in a mixture of salt, herbs, and spices that Sebastian now recognized from Josephine's notebook. Every time I cook one of my grandmother's recipes, I'm not just preparing food, Gabrielle continued. I'm reclaiming history. I'm proving that excellence existed in places the culinary world refused to look. Sebastian felt the foundation of his professional identity shifting beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about his training, his techniques, his innovations, how much of it was built on appropriated brilliance? The soufflé that collapsed Saturday night, he said slowly. You said I was cooking with anger instead of trust. Your grandmother taught you to cook with technique. Mine taught me to cook with purpose. Gabrielle began mixing her spice rub with the kind of intuitive precision that couldn't be learned from textbooks. When you cook to prove something, the food feels the tension. When you cook to honor something, the food carries that love. Sebastian watched her hands work, seeing for the first time the ritual in her movements, the reverence in her preparation. This wasn't just meal prep, it was ceremony, connection, continuation of a legacy that had survived despite systematic erasure. What am I supposed to do with this information? Sebastian asked. Knowing that my education was built on stolen foundations? Gabrielle looked at him with those intelligent dark eyes, and Sebastian saw not judgment but possibility. You could start by cooking something honest, she said. Something that acknowledges where your techniques really came from. Something that honors the people who created them instead of the people who took credit. Before Sebastian could respond, Henri appeared at the kitchen entrance, his face flushed with excitement. Chef, you need to see this. The food blogger from Taste of the Bay just posted about tonight. She's calling it the most important cooking challenge in San Francisco history. Sebastian and Gabrielle exchanged glances. What had started as a moment of professional rage had become something much larger. A public reckoning with culinary appropriation, a chance to correct historical injustices, a platform to honor voices that had been silenced. How many people are coming tonight? Sebastian asked. Last count, about 200, Henri replied. Local chefs, food writers, culinary students. Even some folks from the James Beard Foundation flew in from New York. As Henri retreated, Sebastian turned back to Gabrielle. Are you ready for that? For all those eyes, all that pressure? Gabrielle smiled, and Sebastian saw something he hadn't noticed before. She wasn't nervous. She was excited. I've been ready for 15 years, she said. The question is, are you ready to cook something that matters instead of something that impresses? Sebastian looked at his own prep station, where ingredients for his usual repertoire waited in perfect organization. Then he looked at Josephine's notebook, still sitting beside Gabrielle's cutting board. For the first time in his career, Sebastian Kane wasn't sure what he was going to cook. And somehow, that felt like exactly where he needed to be. The dinner service had ended 2 hours ago, but the kitchen hummed with different energy now. Instead of the usual post-service cleanup, Sebastian and Gabrielle worked side by side in the soft glow of the prep lights, their movements synchronized in a way that spoke of newfound understanding. Sebastian had scrapped his original menu entirely. Now he stood at his station, working with ingredients he hadn't touched in years. The simple, honest components that had first made him fall in love with cooking as a 12-year-old boy in his Polish grandmother's kitchen in Chicago. "Tell me about your first memory of cooking," Gabrielle said, her voice soft in the quiet kitchen. She was making her own adjustments, tasting and retasting her grandmother's spice blend, adding subtle touches that would honor Josephine while expressing her own evolution as a chef. Sebastian paused, his hands stilling over a pile of root vegetables, parsnips, turnips, carrots that reminded him of childhood winters. "I was 12. My parents were fighting again, and I hid in my Babcia's kitchen. She was making pierogi for Sunday dinner, and I asked if I could help." He began peeling the vegetables with methodical precision, the familiar motion bringing back the memory with startling clarity. She handed me a rolling pin and said, "Sebastian, cooking is prayer you can taste." I didn't understand what she meant then. "And now?" Gabrielle asked. "Now I think I'm starting to." Sebastian set down his peeler and really looked at Gabrielle. "What about you? When did you first cook with your grandmother?" Gabrielle's face softened with memory. "I was 7. My parents were working double shifts, so I spent most summers with Grandmama in the Richmond. She was catering a wedding for 300 people, and I begged to help." She moved to her duck legs, which had been curing for hours and were now ready for their slow confit. Her movements were reverent as she nestled them into the duck fat, adjusting the temperature with the precision of someone who understood that patience was an ingredient as important as any spice. "She gave me the job of tasting everything," Gabrielle continued. "Said my young palate could catch things her experienced one might miss. We spent that whole summer cooking together, and she would tell me stories about every dish, where it came from, who had taught it to her, why it mattered." "That's why you cook the way you do," Sebastian realized. "Every dish is connected to something larger." "Food is never just food," Gabrielle agreed. "It's history, it's love, it's resistance, it's hope." When my grandmother made her cornbread, she was connecting us to her grandmother, who had made it for sharecroppers in Alabama. When she created her fusion dishes, she was proving that black voices belonged in American cuisine. Sebastian had moved on to making pasta dough, not the sophisticated preparations that had made him famous, but the simple egg noodles his Babcia had taught him. His hands worked the dough with a gentleness he had forgotten he possessed. "I think I lost that somewhere," he admitted. "The connection, the meaning. I got so focused on perfection, on proving I was the best, that I forgot why I wanted to cook in the first place." "Why did you want to cook?" Gabrielle asked. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, kneading the dough as memories surfaced. "Because it was the only time my family wasn't fighting. When Babcia cooked, everyone came together. My parents would stop arguing, my sister would put down her phone, and we'd all just be present. The food made us a family again, even if it was just for an hour." Gabrielle nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And when did you stop cooking for your family and start cooking for critics?" The question hit Sebastian like a physical blow. He tried to remember the last time he had cooked a meal simply because he wanted to share something delicious with people he cared about, and couldn't. "I don't know," he whispered. "Somewhere between culinary school and the first Michelin star, I guess. It became about technique instead of connection." "It doesn't have to stay that way," Gabrielle said gently. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kitchen filled with the quiet sounds of professional preparation. Sebastian found himself watching Gabrielle's techniques with new appreciation. Every movement was efficient but never rushed, precise but never mechanical. She cooked the way musicians played, with technical skill in service of emotional expression. "Can I ask you something?" Sebastian said as he rolled his pasta dough to the perfect thickness. "Of course. Why didn't you fight back? When you were passed over for promotions, when people assumed you were just hired help, why didn't you demand recognition?" Gabrielle was quiet for so long that Sebastian thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried years of accumulated wisdom and pain. "Because fighting takes energy, and I needed all my energy for surviving. After my husband died, I had a choice. I could spend my time being angry about what was unfair, or I could focus on keeping my daughter fed and clothed and in school. I chose survival." She moved to her sweet potatoes, which had been roasting slowly for the past hour. The kitchen filled with their earthy sweetness as she peeled away the charred skins, revealing the vibrant orange flesh beneath. "But survival isn't the same as living," she continued. "I've been surviving for 15 years. Tonight, I get to live again." Sebastian felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "I've been surviving too, I think. Surviving the pressure to be perfect, to maintain my reputation, to never show weakness. What would it look like if you lived instead?" Gabrielle asked. Sebastian considered this as he cut his pasta into perfect ribbons. Cooking food that told stories instead of just demonstrating technique. Mentoring young cooks instead of intimidating them. Maybe even. He trailed off, the thought too new and fragile to voice. Maybe even what? Maybe even admitting when I'm wrong. Acknowledging when someone else's techniques are better than mine. Giving credit where it's actually due. Gabrielle smiled, a real radiant smile that transformed her entire face. "That sounds like living to me." As if summoned by their conversation, Henri appeared at the kitchen entrance, followed by Marie and several other members of Sebastian's team. They carried bottles of wine and looked hesitant, as if unsure whether they were intruding. "Chef," Marie said carefully, "we wanted to wish you both luck tonight, and to say, well, we're proud to be part of whatever this becomes." Sebastian felt an unexpected surge of emotion. These people had worked for him for years, had followed his exacting standards and endured his perfectionist demands. But he had never asked what they wanted from their careers, never invested in their dreams the way Josephine had invested in the community of cooks around her. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. "All of you. I know I haven't been the easiest chef to work for." "You've taught us precision," Henri said diplomatically. "But watching tonight, I think we're all learning something new about purpose." They opened the wine, a simple Pinot Noir that Sebastian would normally have dismissed as insufficiently complex, and passed around glasses. In the warm light of the prep kitchen, surrounded by the aromas of their carefully prepared ingredients, it felt less like a pre-competition gathering and more like a family dinner. "To Josephine Washington," Sebastian said, raising his glass. "And to all the voices that have been silenced but not forgotten. To Babshas and grandmamas everywhere," Gabrielle added, "who taught us that love is the most important ingredient." They drank, and Sebastian felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The simple joy of sharing a moment with people who understood the sacred nature of feeding others. As his team gradually departed, wishing them both luck, Sebastian and Gabrielle found themselves alone again. The clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m. In just over an hour, their challenge would begin. "Are you nervous?" Sebastian asked. "Terrified," Gabrielle admitted, "but also more excited than I've been in 15 years. What about you?" Sebastian considered the question honestly. "I'm afraid of losing everything I've built. but I'm more afraid of winning and staying exactly who I've been." Gabrielle nodded, understanding perfectly. "Then we're both cooking for the right reasons." Sebastian looked at his prepared ingredients. Simple, honest, connected to memory and meaning rather than technique and accolades. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure if his food would be technically superior. But he was confident it would be true. And somehow, that felt like the most important victory of all. The dining room had been transformed into an arena. Every table had been removed except for one, a single judge's table positioned at the center of the room where 5 distinguished food critics sat like a culinary tribunal. The rest of the space was filled with standing observers, local chefs, food writers, culinary students, and what seemed like half of San Francisco's restaurant industry. Sebastian stood at his prep station, surveying the crowd through the kitchen's service window. He recognized faces from every major restaurant in the city, chefs who had trained under the same mentors, competed for the same accolades, built careers on the same foundation of classical techniques that he was now questioning. "Quite an audience," Gabrielle said softly, appearing beside him. "Are you ready for this?" Sebastian asked, noting the slight tremor in his own voice. "As ready as I'll ever be." Gabrielle's hands were steady as she adjusted her mise en place one final time. "You!" Before Sebastian could answer, Roland Pierce emerged from the dining room, his face flushed with excitement and wine. Behind him trailed a woman Sebastian didn't recognize. Severe black suit, platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, carrying herself with the predatory confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Sebastian!" Roland called out, his voice carrying the false joviality of someone delivering bad news with a smile. "I'd like you to meet Victoria Cross from Cross Media Group. She's here to document tonight's event for a special feature." Victoria stepped forward, extending a manicured hand that Sebastian reluctantly shook. "Chef Kane, what an absolute pleasure. I've been following your career since your days at Lou Bernardine. Such a shame about recent developments." Something in her tone set Sebastian's teeth on edge. "Recent developments? Oh, you haven't seen?" Victoria pulled out her phone with practiced efficiency. "The story broke about an hour ago. My investigative team has been quite busy." She turned the screen toward Sebastian, and his blood turned to ice. Culinary fraud. Michelin star chef's career built on stolen recipes. Cross Media Group investigation reveals that acclaimed chef Sebastian Kane's signature techniques were appropriated from the work of Josephine Washington, a black chef whose innovations were systematically stolen by the culinary establishment in the 1960s. Sebastian's vision tunneled as he read the article. Every technique he had claimed as his innovation, every classical preparation he had been taught, every foundation of his culinary identity, all exposed as stolen from Josephine Washington and other marginalized chefs whose work had been erased from culinary history. But it wasn't the historical revelation that made Sebastian's hands shake. It was the final paragraph. Sources close to Kane's current dishwasher, Gabrielle Thompson, Washington's granddaughter, suggest that Thompson deliberately sought employment at La Lumiere 3 years ago with the express purpose of exposing Kane's fraudulent career. "This whole challenge was planned from the beginning," reports an anonymous kitchen staffer. "She's been gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy him publicly." Sebastian's eyes snapped up to meet Gabrielle's. The color had drained from her face, but whether from shock or guilt, he couldn't tell. "Is this true?" he whispered. "Sebastian, Is it true?" His voice was louder now, cutting through the kitchen's pre-service bustle. Around them, his staff had gone silent, their attention focused on the confrontation unfolding at the prep station. Gabrielle's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Her silence was answer enough. Victoria Cross smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had just detonated a perfectly placed explosive. "The beauty of investigative journalism, Chef Kane, is that the truth always surfaces eventually. Tonight's little cooking challenge isn't about culinary skill. It's about justice. Poetic justice. Sebastian felt something fundamental break inside his chest. The fragile trust he and Gabrielle had built over the past few days, the connection he had thought was real, the possibility of redemption he had begun to believe in, all of it crumbled like his soufflés had 3 nights ago. "You played me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of absolute betrayal. 3 years. 3 years of watching, learning, planning my destruction. "That's not," Gabrielle started. "Don't." Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet. "Don't you dare lie to me now. Did you take this job to expose me?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Around them, the kitchen had gone completely silent. Even the ventilation fans seemed to hold their breath. Gabrielle straightened her shoulders, and when she spoke, her voice was steady but hollow. "Yes. I took this job because I wanted to understand how you had built a career on my grandmother's innovations. I wanted to see if you knew where your techniques really came from. And the challenge. This whole evening, was it all orchestrated?" "No." Gabrielle's composure finally cracked. "The challenge was never part of any plan. When you issued it Saturday night, I was as shocked as everyone else. But yes, I had been documenting your use of my grandmother's techniques. Yes, I had been gathering evidence." Sebastian nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place with devastating clarity. "The questions about my cooking, the comments about technique versus heart, the stories about your grandmother, all of it was manipulation. The stories were true, but your reasons for telling them weren't." Sebastian's control finally snapped. "You weren't sharing your history with me, you were building a case against me." The accusation echoed through the kitchen. Sebastian could see his staff exchanging glances, could feel the weight of 200 observers beyond the service window, all witnessing his professional assassination. "You want justice for your grandmother?" Sebastian continued, his voice rising with each word. "Fine. You want to expose the culinary establishment that stole her innovations? I understand that. But you didn't have to destroy me personally to do it. You didn't have to make me believe we were building something real." Gabrielle's eyes filled with tears, but Sebastian was past caring. The betrayal cut too deep, the manipulation too complete. "You know what the cruelest part is," he said, his voice dropping back to a whisper. "For the first time in years, I was cooking with heart again. For the first time in my career, I was ready to acknowledge my mistakes, to give credit where it was due. I was ready to use my platform to honor your grandmother's legacy." "You still can." "How?" Sebastian's laugh was bitter. "How can I honor anything now? My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. And it was all a lie anyway, wasn't it? The connection we built, the conversations we shared, just professional manipulation." Gabrielle stepped toward him, her hand outstretched. "Sebastian, please. The connection was real. Everything I told you about cooking with purpose, about honoring the past, that was all true. But you were never going to let me honor it, were you?" Sebastian stepped back, avoiding her touch. "You were always going to destroy me instead." The words hung between them like a chasm that couldn't be crossed. Sebastian could see the pain in Gabrielle's eyes, could hear the sincerity in her voice, but the betrayal was too complete. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be reassembled with good intentions. Victoria Cross, who had been watching the exchange with professional satisfaction, stepped forward again. "Chef Kane, would you care to comment on how it feels to be exposed as a fraud?" Sebastian turned on her with fury that had been building for 3 days. "Get out of my kitchen. This is a public event." "I said get out." Sebastian's voice boomed through the kitchen. You want your story? You've got it. But I won't be your entertainment anymore. Victoria retreated, but her damage was done. The poison had been delivered, the destruction complete. Sebastian looked around his kitchen, the space that had been his sanctuary, his identity, his entire world. Tomorrow it would all be gone. His techniques exposed as stolen, his career revealed as built on appropriated foundations, his team probably looking for new jobs. And the woman he had begun to trust, maybe even to care for, had orchestrated it all. The challenge is off, he said, his voice empty of emotion. You win by default. The restaurant is yours. I hope your grandmother's legacy was worth destroying everything I've worked for. He untied his chef's jacket with mechanical precision and laid it on the prep counter. 34 years of culinary passion reduced to a piece of white cotton. As Sebastian walked toward the kitchen's back exit, Gabrielle called after him. Sebastian, wait. You don't understand. But Sebastian was done understanding. He was done trusting. He was done believing that people could be anything other than what their worst moments revealed them to be. The door slammed behind him with finality, leaving Gabrielle alone in the kitchen she had fought 3 years to claim, surrounded by the ruins of a connection she had destroyed in pursuit of justice. In the dining room, 200 observers waited for a cooking challenge that would never happen. And in the alley behind La Lumiere, Sebastian Kane sat in his car and wondered if this was what it felt like to lose everything at once. Sebastian's phone had been ringing for 6 hours straight. He sat on the floor of his Pacific Heights penthouse, his back against the wall-to-wall windows that overlooked the bay. The morning fog had lifted, revealing Alcatraz Island in stark detail. An island prison that felt like an appropriate metaphor for his current situation. Trapped by his own choices, surrounded by water too cold and deep to cross. The calls came in waves, lawyers offering to sue for defamation, publicists promising they could spin this, television producers eager to turn his downfall into content. But Sebastian let each call go to voicemail, the notifications piling up like evidence of a life he no longer wanted to claim. 47 missed calls from Roland Pierce, 23 from Catherine Wells, 12 from Food Network, 8 missed calls from Mom. That last one made him pause. His mother, calling from Chicago, probably having seen the news coverage, probably worried about her son whose career had just imploded on national television. He almost answered that one. Almost. Instead, he opened his laptop and began typing. To whom it may concern. Effective immediately, I am resigning my position as executive chef and part owner of La Lumiere restaurant. Recent investigations have revealed that many of the techniques I learned and employed throughout my career were originally created by Josephine Washington and other marginalized chefs whose contributions were systematically erased from culinary history. I take full responsibility for perpetuating this injustice, whether knowingly or unknowingly. The fact that I was unaware of the true origins of these techniques does not absolve me of the responsibility to have sought that knowledge. I hereby transfer my ownership stake in La Lumiere to Gabrielle Thompson, granddaughter of Josephine Washington, who has proven herself to be not only a skilled chef but a guardian of culinary justice that was long overdue. Sebastian stared at the words on his screen. 20 years of building a career, and it all came down to 3 paragraphs. But something was missing, something that would make this resignation feel complete rather than merely defeated. His doorbell chimed with its pretentious melody. Sebastian ignored it, focusing on his letter. But the chiming persisted, followed by knocking, then a familiar voice calling through the door. Sebastian, I know you're in there. We need to talk. Marie. His sous chef of 3 years, the woman who had learned more from watching him cook than most people learned in culinary school. Sebastian considered not answering, but something in her voice, urgency mixed with determination, made him reconsider. She stood in his hallway holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing civilian clothes instead of her chef's whites. Her usually perfect ponytail was messy, her eyes red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept. "You look terrible," she said without preamble, pushing past him into the apartment. "Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear." Marie set the coffee on his granite kitchen island and turned to face him. "The whole kitchen staff is downstairs in your lobby. We've been here since 5 a.m. Why? Because we're not letting you do this alone." Marie's voice was firm. "Whatever you're planning, resignation letter, disappearing act, dramatic exile, we're not letting you make that choice without all the information." What information could possibly change anything? Sebastian gestured toward his laptop, where the resignation letter glowed accusingly on the screen. "My career was built on stolen foundations. Gabrielle played me for 3 years. It's over." "Is it?" Marie pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. "Have you seen what's happening online?" Sebastian reluctantly looked at the social media feeds Marie was scrolling through. But instead of the mockery and condemnation he expected, he saw something entirely different. Chef Marcus tweets, "What happened to Sebastian Kane last night was wrong. Yes, we need to address culinary appropriation. But ambush journalism isn't justice." STF Chef Alliance posts, "The techniques Josephine Washington created belong in the spotlight. But destroying careers isn't how we honor her legacy. We need restoration, not revenge. Black chefs united. Complex situation. Stolen techniques must be acknowledged. But Gabrielle Chef's methods raise questions about justice versus vengeance. Community divided. Culinary students SF. Watching Sebastian Kane and Chef Gabrielle last night. Both deserved better than that ambush. Real change happens through education, not humiliation. The culinary community is split," Marie explained. "Yes, people are angry about the appropriation. But they're also angry about how the story came out. Ambush journalism, manipulation, setting up someone for public destruction. That's not how professionals handle disputes." Sebastian scrolled through more posts, seeing a pattern he hadn't expected. The industry wasn't celebrating his downfall. They were questioning whether justice and vengeance were the same thing. "It doesn't matter," Sebastian said, handing back the phone. "The facts are still the facts. My techniques were stolen. My career was built on lies." "Were they?" Marie challenged. "Or were they adapted, evolved, taught in good faith by mentors who may not have known the full history either?" Sebastian started to respond, but Marie held up her hand. "I'm not excusing anything. Josephine Washington deserves recognition, and the culinary community needs to face its history of appropriation. But that doesn't mean every chef who learned those techniques is a fraud. It means we need to do better going forward." Before Sebastian could respond, his doorbell chimed again. This time, when he opened it, he found Henri, followed by the rest of his kitchen staff. 10 people who had worked under his leadership, learned from his teaching, built their own careers alongside his. "What is this?" Sebastian asked. "An intervention," Henri said simply. "We've been talking all night. About what happened, about what it means, about what comes next." They filed into his living room, this group of cooks and chefs who had become a family over years of shared service. Sebastian felt overwhelmed by their presence, by the fact that they had come here instead of distancing themselves from his scandal. "We have something to tell you," Marie said. "About Gabrielle." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "I don't want to hear anything about Gabrielle." "You need to," Henri insisted. "She came back to the restaurant after you left. She was devastated, crying, talking about how she never meant for it to happen like that." "Of course she didn't," Sebastian said bitterly. "She probably wanted to destroy me more slowly, more privately." "No," Marie said firmly. She never contacted that reporter. She never wanted the story to come out like that. She's been trying to reach you all night to explain. Sebastian felt something crack in the armor of his anger. What do you mean she never contacted the reporter? The Victoria Cross woman? She's been investigating culinary appropriation for months. She found Josephine's story through her own research, not through Gabrielle. When she discovered Gabrielle was working at your restaurant, she put pressure on her to cooperate. So Gabrielle did cooperate, Sebastian said. She confirmed facts, Henri clarified. She didn't orchestrate anything. And when the reporter showed up last night with that ambush story, Gabrielle was as shocked as you were. Sebastian felt his carefully constructed narrative beginning to wobble. But she admitted she took the job to gather evidence against me. She took the job to understand if you knew where your techniques came from, Marie corrected. There's a difference between seeking understanding and planning destruction. Is there? Sebastian asked, but his voice had lost some of its bitter edge. Marie stepped closer. Sebastian, I've watched Gabrielle work for 3 years. I've seen how she looks at you when you cook, how she studies your techniques. It wasn't the look of someone planning revenge. It was the look of someone trying to understand how her grandmother's legacy fit into the modern culinary world. And last night, Henri added, when she realized how the story was going to come out, she tried to stop it. She tried to get that reporter to wait, to find a different way to tell the story. But it was too late. Sebastian sank onto his couch, the weight of this new information settling over him. His phone buzzed with another notification, and he almost ignored it. But something made him look. Text from unknown number. This is Gabrielle. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know the truth. I never wanted to destroy you. I wanted to understand you. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. What Victoria Cross did last night wasn't justice. It was journalism. I'm sorry you got caught in the crossfire of my family's pain. Sebastian stared at the message for a long time. His staff waited in respectful silence, letting him process this shift in perspective. What do you think I should do? He asked finally. Cook, Marie said simply. With her. Show the world that acknowledgement and destruction aren't the same thing. Show them that 2 chefs can honor the past while building something new. And if she really was manipulating me? Then you'll know, Henri said. But if she wasn't, if this was just 2 people trying to figure out how to carry their family legacies forward, then maybe you both deserve a chance to do this right. Sebastian looked around at his team, these people who had chosen to support him in his darkest moment. Then he looked at his resignation letter, still glowing on his laptop screen. He had a choice to make: retreat into wounded pride and let both their stories end in destruction, or find the courage to discover whether redemption was still possible. His finger hovered over the delete key. The kitchen was empty when Sebastian arrived at 6 p.m., carrying a duffel bag of ingredients and a heart full of uncertainty. The dining room beyond the service window had been reset to its usual configuration, but tonight it would serve a different purpose. Not a battle between 2 chefs, but a collaboration 24 hours in the making. He found Gabrielle's note taped to the prep station where they had worked together the night before. Sebastian, I understand if you can't forgive me. I understand if you never want to see me again. But if you're reading this, then maybe you're willing to finish what we started. Not the challenge. Something bigger. Something that honors both our grandmothers and all the voices that came before us. The ingredients for my grandmother's menu are in the walk-in, labeled with her original recipes. Use them however feels right to you. G. Sebastian walked to the cooler and found duck legs still curing in their spice mixture, sweet potatoes that had been perfectly roasted, fresh collard greens cleaned and ready for preparation. Everything Gabrielle had prepared with such care, left for him to use or ignore as he chose. Beside Josephine's ingredients, he found his own, the simple components he had selected for his grandmother's pierogi, the root vegetables that connected him to childhood memories of cooking as prayer rather than performance. He was still staring at the two sets of ingredients when the kitchen's back door opened. Gabrielle entered quietly, wearing her simple black chef's coat and carrying her grandmother's leather-bound recipe book. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined, and when she saw Sebastian, relief flooded her features. "You came," she said softly. "I almost didn't." Sebastian's voice was careful, guarded. "I spent all day trying to decide if I could trust you again." "And what did you decide?" Sebastian considered the question honestly. "I decided that trust isn't about certainty. It's about choosing to believe in someone's intentions even when their methods were flawed." Gabrielle nodded, accepting the implicit forgiveness in his words. "I need you to know something. When I took this job 3 years ago, I was angry. My grandmother died without recognition, her innovation stolen, her name erased from culinary history. I wanted to understand how someone could build a career on her techniques without knowing where they came from." She moved to her prep station, her hands finding familiar motions as she spoke. "But watching you cook, learning your methods, seeing how you trained your staff, I realized you weren't a thief. You were just incomplete. You had half the story, the techniques without the context. And I started to think maybe the answer wasn't exposing you, but helping you understand the full truth." "So why didn't you just tell me?" Sebastian asked. "Because I was scared," Gabrielle admitted. "Scared you wouldn't believe me. Scared you'd fire me before I could prove it. Scared that if I revealed who I was, you'd dismiss me the way the culinary world dismissed my grandmother." Sebastian moved to his own station, beginning to unpack his ingredients. "And when I issued the challenge, I panicked. You were so angry, so hurt by that review, and suddenly I had this opportunity to show you what my grandmother's cooking really was. Not just the techniques you'd learned secondhand, but the soul behind them, the stories that made them matter." Gabrielle picked up her grandmother's notebook, holding it like a sacred text. "I never meant for Victoria Cross to turn it into a public execution. When she contacted me last week, she said she was writing about culinary appropriation in general. I thought she was going to tell my grandmother's story properly, with context and respect." "But you did cooperate with her investigation," Sebastian said, not accusingly but needing the full truth. "I confirmed facts she had already discovered through her own research. I didn't give her anything she couldn't have found in public records or old newspaper articles. But I also didn't realize she was planning to ambush you with it during the challenge." Sebastian began preparing his pierogi dough, the familiar motion of kneading helping to organize his thoughts. "Marie told me you tried to stop the story from coming out the way it did. I called Victoria 20 times yesterday, begging her to wait, to find a different approach. But she said the story was too hot to sit on, that the public had a right to know immediately." Gabrielle's hands worked automatically, seasoning her duck legs with the precision born of years of practice. "I realized then that I had made a terrible mistake. I thought I was seeking justice, but I had enabled something closer to revenge." They worked in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own preparations. But it was a comfortable silence now, the silence of two professionals who understood each other's rhythms. "What happens now?" Sebastian asked as he rolled out pasta dough with the same technique his Babsha had taught him 40 years ago. "That depends on what you want to happen," Gabrielle replied. "Legally, you forfeited the restaurant to me last night. But I don't want to win through manipulation and misunderstanding." Sebastian paused in his rolling. "What do you want?" "I want to cook with you. Really cook. Not competing against each other, but building something together. Something that honors both our grandmothers and proves that acknowledgement doesn't require destruction." Gabrielle moved to the stove, beginning to heat duck fat for the confit. The kitchen filled with the rich aroma of herbs and spices that told stories of innovation and tradition. "I want to create a menu that tells the truth," she continued. "Your grandmother's pierogi alongside my grandmother's duck confit. Classical European techniques enhanced by African-American innovation. Not fusion for the sake of novelty, but fusion for the sake of honesty." Sebastian felt something shifting in his chest, the same loosening he had experienced the night before, but stronger now. A menu that acknowledges where our techniques really came from. A menu that proves excellence has no single source, Gabrielle agreed. That innovation comes from unexpected places, and that the best cooking happens when different traditions learn from each other instead of erasing each other. Sebastian looked around the kitchen that had been his kingdom for 3 years, then at Gabrielle, who was gently lowering duck legs into their warm fat bath with the reverence of someone handling family heirlooms. "Partners?" he asked. "Partners," Gabrielle confirmed, her smile transforming her entire face. The kitchen door opened, and Marie appeared, followed by Henri and the rest of Sebastian's team. Behind them came a smaller group, about 50 people instead of the previous night's circus crowd. Sebastian recognized local chefs, culinary students, food writers who were known for their integrity rather than their sensationalism. "We thought you might want witnesses," Marie explained. "Real ones this time." Sebastian and Gabrielle exchanged glances, then nodded. This wasn't about proving superiority anymore. It was about demonstrating possibility. They worked together with a synchronization that felt natural, as if they had been cooking as partners for years instead of hours. Sebastian's pierogi filled with a mixture of potato and farmer's cheese, elevated with truffle oil and fresh herbs. Gabrielle's duck confit, redolent with 5-spice and finished with a sorghum glaze that bridged Southern tradition and global technique. Sebastian prepared a sweet potato puree using Gabrielle's grandmother's recipe but finished with European butter techniques he had learned in Lyon. Gabrielle created a collard green chimichurri that honored both her southern roots and Sebastian's understanding of classical sauces. For dessert, they collaborated on something entirely new. Sebastian's pierogi dough filled with sweet farmer's cheese and served alongside Gabrielle's cornbread soufflé, the two traditions meeting on a single plate for the first time in culinary history. As they plated their final dishes, Sebastian felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. The pure joy of cooking for the love of it, for the pleasure of sharing something delicious with people who would appreciate not just the technique but the story behind it. "This is what I lost," he said softly to Gabrielle as they carried their plates to the dining room. "The connection, the meaning, the reason I started cooking in the first place." "You didn't lose it," Gabrielle replied. "You just forgot where you put it. But muscle memory is a powerful thing, in cooking and in life." They presented their collaborative menu to the small gathering, explaining not just the techniques but the histories, not just the flavors but the stories. Sebastian found himself talking about his Polish grandmother with the same reverence Gabrielle brought to memories of Josephine. As their guests tasted and commented, Sebastian realized this felt more satisfying than any Michelin star he had ever earned. This was cooking as conversation, food as bridge building, technique in service of connection rather than competition. "What do we call this place now?" Gabrielle asked as they cleaned up together, their movements now perfectly synchronized. Sebastian considered the question, looking around the kitchen that had been his sanctuary and was now their shared space. "Lumière et heritage," he said. "Light and heritage. Honoring what came before while illuminating what comes next." "I like it," Gabrielle smiled. "Our grandmothers would have liked it too." As they turned off the lights and locked the restaurant, Sebastian felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about tomorrow's service, curiosity about what they would create next, gratitude for the unexpected path that had led him not just to a new partner, but to a deeper understanding of what it meant to cook with purpose. 6 months later, Lumière et Heritage would earn its 3rd Michelin star, not for technical perfection, but for innovation rooted in tradition, for cuisine that honored the past while creating something entirely new. But that night, walking through the San Francisco fog with Gabrielle, Sebastian was already completely satisfied. He had found his way back to cooking as prayer you could taste. And he had found someone who understood that the most important ingredient in any dish was the love and respect behind it. What family recipe or cooking tradition has shaped who you are today? Share your story in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of second chances and unexpected partnerships. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.